real weird, real out there stuff. I just remember it was like some kind of demon research lab, a sentient sword. You can brainjack and possess people, and the sword, which has a will, because I think you're meant to be playing as the sword, right? If I
Yeah, you're
remember
playing
right.
as
Yeah.
Maken.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Millennium Edition, a podcast about video games in the 2000s. I'm Sean Douglas. I'm a writer, teacher, and podcaster. And I am here today with Andrew Elmore. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, what's up, Sean?
And we are also here with Fredo Fabrucci. Hi, Fredo.
Hey, delighted to be here. That's right, folks. Your old pal Fredo has snuck his way onto another video game podcast, and can't wait to chat today. Really excited.
Escape containment.
And I was excited to find two other people who wanted to talk about Maken X, because I knew this would be a trickier one to find guests for. But it sounds like I found two people who are perfect for this episode. I knew this was a game that I wanted to cover early on with this show because it's just such a bizarre and unique and interesting game. And it sounds like we all have different levels of experience with it and different backgrounds with it. So I'm excited to see how this goes. Millennium Edition is a new show, part of the Soundstone Podcast Network, along with my other show, Kirby Conversations, as well as Flashback 64, Pixels and Polygons, and Instruction Derby. We encourage you to check out those shows as well when you're done with this one. So Maken X is a 1999 first-person sword fighting game, I guess, from Atlas, whatever genre you want to call this. A first-person action game with swords, released in November 25th, 1999 in Japan, and then came to North America in 2000. And it shares a lot of lineage with the Shin Megami Tensei series and Persona, and those are series that I am not very familiar with, but it sounds like both of you, to some degree, are, at least a lot more than I am. And we can talk about what those ties might be. But it definitely carries over a lot of similar aesthetic decisions, and I think you can tell by that those games are made by the same people. For people that are familiar with Persona and familiar with Shin Megami Tensei, has that same kind of fantasy, sci-fi, sort of horror-inflected art direction to it. Character designs from Kazuma Kaneko. The director on this game was Katsura Ashino, who also, like, more recently did Persona 5. He did Metaphor Refantasio, and I believe this was his first action game. Before that, he had worked on RPGs, like in Shin Megami Tensei. And this was also his directorial debut.
Oh, very interesting.
And the producer was Koji Okada. But yeah, definitely a sort of spin-off of Shin Megami Tensei. And they were excited to work on the Dreamcast when they realized how powerful it was. They carried over a lot of the team, I believe, from Persona 2 is what I read.
Yep.
And this was also one of Atlas's first full 3D games.
I think it is their first full.
It's his very first one?
I believe so.
Okay. I think you can kind of tell in some ways, for better or for worse. But yeah, I actually really liked this game, even as experimental as it is in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But very cool to see them trying something new. I think they were really excited to take on what the Dreamcast could do. Fredo and Andrew, what were your first experiences with this game?
Yeah, I'm not sure where I first encountered Maken X. I'm not a big Persona guy, but I am a big time just Shin Megami Tensei otherwise guy.
Oh yes, Kindred Spirits.
Yeah!
We'll talk more about that later, but yes, absolutely.
So yeah, like looking at the art of this game and seeing, like, obviously Kazuma Kaneko's character style is extremely obvious, for lack of a better word. Like it's there. So I just kind of before I played this game, kind of always assumed that it was a Megaton spinoff to some degree, but I don't believe it actually is in any official way. It's just it happens to share a lot of the same staff and a lot of the same like ideas and philosophical concepts and a lot of the same themes, and a lot of the same creatives doing a lot of the same things. It's just I don't believe it is technically has that SMT stamp on it. Anyway, yeah, no, I just as a big time Dreamcast fan, this jumped out to me the first time that I saw any kind of like footage or screenshot or whatever of this game, because there are big 3D like first person experiences on the Dreamcast that aren't on some kind of weird arcadey rail are kind of few and far between in a weird way, unless they're like a weird port of a, okay, let's be honest, a weird messy port of a PC shooter usually. Like Soldier of Fortune or the Dreamcast ports of Quake 3 and UT99, stuff like that. Like Rainbow Six Rogue Spear, stuff like that.
Kiss Psycho Circus, all the classics.
Exactly. It's either that or it's like Outrigger, right? Or like if you want to call like parts of like Sega Marine Fishing technically is a first whatever. Like I'm stretching to find examples here. There's not, it's a one analog stick game, which it is a one analog stick controller, which is not abnormal for the time necessarily. That was the same for the Saturn 3D pad and obviously the N64 controller and everything. So I think it just kind of doesn't necessarily lend itself well to where a lot of kind of first-person interaction design was moving at the time. Although the hardware architecture of the Dreamcast very much does. Having that Power VR card in there, it feels like it was built to run Quake 1 way too fast. In like a homebrew build or something. Just the Dreamcast is a very strange piece of hardware that I have a lot of affinity for. Anyway, all that to say, just as a big Mega 10 guy and someone who is looking for, who's always on the lookout for unique experiences on the Dreamcast, Maken X stood out to me very, sharply early on. It was one of those games where I was like, I feel like this is probably going to be prohibitively expensive someday if I don't jump on it right now. And I don't believe that's the case necessarily. I haven't looked in a while. I'm afraid to.
I ordered it off eBay just like a few months ago, and it was not that expensive. Not super cheap.
We're
but
grading
not,
on
like,
the Dreamcast scale
expensive.
here too. It's But yeah, I don't know. It's a game that I have started many times and found myself accidentally going down different routes many times, but I don't believe I've ever actually finished it. I apologize. I desperately wanted to this time, but I ended up having to spend most of my last few weeks trying to eat as much Quest 64 as possible for a flashback.
Nice. I am looking forward to that episode. I haven't beaten it either. I think I'm right at the last final boss. I've taken a few stabs at it and haven't beaten it yet, but I think I'm like right on the tail end. So it's okay that you haven't beaten it.
Thank you. Thank you for absolving me of this guilt that has been just eating me inside out.
And Fredo, this is one that I think you have maybe the most history out of the three of us with.
Maybe, yeah. So I did finish the game, by the way, but 27 years ago or whatever. So I don't even remember, but I do remember completing it. So it was really interesting hearing Andrew reflect on like the fandom for Shin Megami Tensei, because I'm also a big fan of that series. But when this game came out, I had not really made the connection with the rest of the series, because I had played the first couple Persona 1 and part 1 of Persona 2, right? Because I think the Japanese Persona 2 got split into 2 games and we only got one of them, or something.
Sin and
something
Eternal
weird
Punishment.
like that. Yeah, that's
eventually,
right.
like the PSP remakes and kind of like
later on.
Up, but like that's beyond the scope of this podcast.
Right, yes. But I didn't really, it wasn't until Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne on the PS2 that I got like really sunk in with that series and kind of really became like a
hit here though. Like, I mean, you weren't playing a lot of maybe you were, I don't know, but like not a whole lot of people were playing Jack Bros on their Virtual Boy.
Right, yeah, Jack,
like,
all that stuff was pretty obscure, right?
Yeah,
Jack Brothers on Virtual Boy, and those first Persona games were great and I enjoyed them at the time, but I didn't, because they were marketed as like the Revelations, right? They tried to rename SMT to Revelations and put those 2 games on the label, and maybe just those 2, and it didn't stick. So Maken X being a weird maybe spin-off, maybe not. Never made that connection until years later. I had just picked it up because I'd gotten the Dreamcast when it first came out. I think I might have gotten it for Christmas that year, and thinking back, it might be the last system that I didn't just like buy for myself, because I was just at that age where I was like starting to make my own money and stuff. So after that, I was getting them all myself. And I'm someone that just likes quirky, interesting, oddball games. Naturally, I'm a big fan of the Sega Dreamcast, and I
There's a
just
few of them
remember
on
when
there.
that game came out, it was getting like all the reviews and
Yeah.
press and stuff it was getting were, because I was reading magazines and some of the earlier GameSpot and whatever websites at the time, and it just sounded like a really interesting game. That was like the thing everybody talked about. Well, there's nothing else quite like this. It's not the best game, but it's quirky and it's interesting, and it's gonna definitely stand out. And that was enough to sell me on it. So I just like went out and picked it up and really enjoyed it. And then years later, kind of made the connection with the other SMT games. But very interesting, bold, experimental game for the time, because melee combat in first person games, especially first person games that are primarily focused on melee combat, a relatively new thing. I mean, I remember like this, and then a little bit later, like Breakdown on the Xbox. There was a few things that really, the Chronicles of Riddick had like long sections that were very like melee focused. So there was a few games that really like developed that. But at the time this had come out, you had like melee weapons in games like Duke Nukem and Samurai Showdown, Shadow Warrior, but you didn't really have, at least I had not experienced a game like this where like it's first person and it's like sword fighting and you're locking onto enemies and doing these dodge jumps, almost kind of like Zelda, and very, very oddball stuff. And it definitely stood out to me. Very interesting and memorable game. So we'll get into it. It's certainly not perfect. It has like clunkiness that you would expect from a game that's doing something that nobody else had really done before, especially with just one analog stick. But oh boy, what a neat and interesting one, and what a great like emblematic game of the sort of bolder, more experimental releases that Sega was going for with the Dreamcast, trying to do some of that stuff that would have never come out here, or didn't come out here on the Saturn, which of course was a big thing that a big reason people cite for why the Saturn didn't do better in the West, because we didn't get all the great games, right? So Sega seemed to learn that lesson. I mean, obviously the system didn't make it for all sorts of other reasons, but I really appreciated that they were trying to do stuff like that, and I had a terrific time with it at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that a lot of that is what drew me to the game as well. This is a game I'm very new to, like relatively speaking. I first heard about it last year from the YouTube channel Dreamcast Enjoyer, which is a very good channel about Dreamcast games.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah.
And it just looked like nothing I had ever played before. It's like, this just seems so different and so weird. I don't think I've ever played like a first person sword fighting game before. Like, I'm sure there's like sections of games and stuff that were in first person with the sword or whatever, but like a game quite like this, it just looked like nothing like anything I had played before. So I wanted to try it. So I ordered a copy and started playing it this year and have really enjoyed it. And I thought this would make a good fit for the podcast that I'm developing. So now we're here. So something I'd like to cover before we get too much further is what this game's story is and how it plays, like what you're actually doing in this game for people that would be new to it. So would anyone like to attempt to describe what the plot of this game is? I'm relatively like equipped to do that, and I do have the manual here to help me, but would anyone like to try to describe what this game is about and what you're actually doing in it?
Yikes. Yeah, it's I'm gonna see what I can remember, because I think the weapon itself is like a sentient being, and it's
a goofy looking Metapod.
Yeah, it does look like Metapod.
and it's like a demon research lab, which I guess is sort of how it fits in theoretically to the Shin Megami Tensei games, right? Of like a researcher is trying to like experiment with the demon realm, and And then there was you could brainjack, right, as you gain psi, and you could like brainjack people, and then the form of your weapon would change based on
Right.
who you were possessing that was carrying it. Real weird, real out there stuff. I just remember it was like some kind of demon research lab, a sentient sword. You can brainjack and possess people, and the sword, which has a will, because I think you're meant to be playing as the sword, right? If I
Yeah, you're
remember
playing
right.
as
Yeah.
Maken.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the manual, I'll just read it as they describe it. So just to summarize, like the United States and China are kind of the main powers, and they're feuding, but then the European Union is also falling apart. And so the
Big old
world is
plague.
kind of
Yeah.
in political disruption.
Prescience.
In Japan, at the Kanazawa Research Institute, funded by an overseas Chinese merchant, epoch-making research was being carried out on a treatment for mental illness that involved psi engineering. Psi is the existence of the human spirit, which has been scientifically proven. Glad this is peer-reviewed, like fully
Look,
like
the demons
certified
live in the internet.
research.
They come out of the computer.
Yeah, it's
You
pretty.
summon them with an app on your phone.
Yeah, Fredo, in your psychology work, did you ever encounter psi?
Not not yet. There is a somewhat infamous paper of that Daryl Bem put out, proving that ESP is real. Obviously that's not the main point. The main point is that he was trying to make is that if you just do an experiment enough times, you'll eventually get like a lucky outlier result, and you can claim whatever off of it. And that's about as close as I've seen to anything like that existing in the actual scientific discipline.
Yeah,
I took an abnormal psych class in community college, and there was a regular kind of tradition of the prof just opening their mouth and just spewing a bunch of flying knives into random people in the class. So
yeah.
relatively
Hake Andre was your professor.
Did you say that right as I put a sip of
Almost
seltzer
a
in my
spit
mouth?
take there.
Whew. So there's psi. I know Fredo had a background in psychology, so I thought I would ask him about that. And then Maken is the first medical instrument in the world that can extract psi and modify it. The development of artificial life is based on Plan X. Maken is about to awaken. What kind of psi will it have? And then I do like later in the manual where they describe psi a little bit further. There's this. The manual I found was actually quite helpful for this game. Let's jump ahead to
talk about throwbacks. Remember when games had like interesting and useful manuals? The game really does feel like a relic of a bygone era, doesn't it?
So psi is a soul that can be manipulated in another dimension. Emotions and senses stem from the psi, not from the brain. Thoughts and feelings are a function of psi, but it can be neither seen nor touched because it exists in another dimension. People do not yet understand this concept. I like that last sentence.
It's such a good way to write that.
They don't understand it yet. Maybe now. Maybe 26 years later, they've made more advances.
Yeah, Maken X 2, let's go. Where it's like it's established and everybody recognizes the science. The National Symposium for Psi Research.
But yeah, so you play initially, well, you play the whole game as Maken, but because Maken can hack into people's psi in a sense, right? And it was originally meant to treat mental illness, but you end up using it to control these different people along the way because there's this evil being who controls all these different sword fighters who will be your enemies throughout the game, and his name is Geist, and there's various subplots of what he's trying to do out in the world. But Kay's father gets killed, and the guy who's supposed to be wielding Maken gets killed by Hake Andre, who's a Russian guy who has bear arms, like the arms of a bear, and can shoot scalpels out of his tongue, and is just one of the many colorful characters you'll meet. But he takes out the guy that's supposed to be taking Maken and going off to fight with it. So then Kay, the daughter of the scientist, has to take it, and you set off with her to take on all these evildoers out in the world that are planning their different political things around the planet. And so you're going from like city to city and country to country, going through these different environments. A lot of the levels are more just like a series of like corridors and hallways and branching paths rather than like a fully open environment, but some are a little bit more open and involve more exploration. And as you go along, you are building up your psi meter with the enemies you defeat. They drop these big like glowing orbs that you can collect, and they're sort of like experience points, and you like level up along the way. And as you level up, you can hack into other characters that you find. And so you meet the Blade Masters, who are sort of the good guys in a sense, but this other sort of wacky team of people around the world. And you get to make decisions along the way. You get prompted with a lot of yes or no questions along the way. What kind of decisions you want to make, whether you're going to team up with this Blade Master or whether Maken's going to try to like, make sacrifices in order to save the world, or does Maken want to take over the world? Like, I don't really know what all can happen necessarily because I've only seen the plot as it progressed through my answers. But there are 7 different endings you can get, and the characters all play relatively similarly. They have different weapons, they have different EX attacks, and that's like an attack you could charge up, and it uses some of your life bar, but it's usually some kind of projectile or some kind of stronger attack that you can charge up for. Otherwise, the characters generally have some kind of slash or stabbing attack, or like a little combo they can do if you attack a few times in a row, and how the different characters swing their weapons and what their weapons are. Like that all varies from character to character, but they all roughly play the same way. You can also lock on to enemies, and while you're locked onto an enemy, you will target them and you can strafe around them, and you can also jump over them. And that's a big mechanic that you'll have to do a lot, is you can do extra damage to enemies when you attack them from behind, and some enemies you can't hurt at all when you just run and try to attack them head on. So you got to jump behind them. So you're waiting for your chance to strike while they're coming at you. You can block, and you can also do a counter attack if you attack right after you deflect an attack by blocking it. But you don't really have a lot of different moves, but the characters are still fairly versatile. And I don't know, anything else you would want to add about what you're actually doing in this game?
Yeah, I think that describes the basic mechanics pretty well. The jumping behind enemies is a thing you you do end up needing to do a lot because, as you say, right, there's certain enemies that are only vulnerable from the back. And I had briefly alluded to it earlier, but the way that you lock on to enemies and then circle around them, it reminded me a little bit of how combat worked in like those early 3D Zelda games. Again, it felt not really much like anything. I remember dealing with multiple enemies was pretty tricky, and you could like shift your lock on, but because whoever you were locked onto, you'd be like circling around them. So sometimes it was, you'd kind of like lose yourself, or you'd try to jump over an enemy and then be in an awkward position to get hit by the other one. I think that
Yep.
the system was not necessarily you could tell it was being stretched to its limits, let's say, right? But I think it worked. It certainly worked well enough for as new of a thing it was at the time, and I do appreciate the element of all the different characters you could take over. As you mentioned, they function very close together, but there was at least enough variance that it was like something, right? Because if they all controlled exactly the same, that would have been like annoying, and I would have felt like an hour into the game, like, okay, I've kind of experienced everything I can experience, at least mechanically. So I appreciated that they at least had that element of, taking over different people was kind of like equipping a different weapon if you were going to, compare it to something in a more traditional sense.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, right? Where like the characters play very similarly, and even if you feel like a different character, it's a little bit more like you just swapped out a weapon rather than you swapped out an entirely different play style.
Yeah, yeah, because then this weapon slashes a little faster. You get a little more combo potential versus something that maybe has a little more range or hits a little harder. Whatever. It's fairly rudimentary. But again, we're talking 1999. There's like no other games like this, so I think it's a pretty reasonable amount of depth for an action game of this style to have. Especially considering that. There was basically nothing, there was like no template for them to base this kind of first person melee combat thing from to begin with.
There's got like Daggerfall. Like there's not.
Yeah, I mean there's those
There's not a
sure,
lot
and
out there.
there was some first person dungeon crawl, Stone Keep and
Sure,
stuff like
yeah.
that, right? But those they don't really play like this. Like
No,
this
no,
is
they don't. And,
yeah,
like,
really different from that stuff. I the best examples I can think of are Breakdown and Riddick, but those were both later.
later on, yeah, and they're also both fantastic.
Yeah,
video
love
games.
both of those games. Huge fan.
Deeply, yes. Gosh, I played through Breakdown again on Series X last year, and it was just ascendant.
chef's
What
kiss.
a beautiful work of art that game is. Anyway, back to Maken X. The history of 3D first-person games in Japan is generally one of slower-paced exploration.
More dungeon
stuff.
crawly type games.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
much so. Like the
Yeah.
moment that Hank Rogers brought Black Onyx over in like wizardry and stuff like that, and started really injecting that kind of DRPG into the culture, and then obviously that you have people like Yuji Horii really cementing that with Dragon Quest and stuff like it, so on and so forth. But like I did a video on this a while back, but a lot of the first person 3D video games that we were seeing in the PC-88 in the late 80s and up through like the 3DO and earlier the PS1 and Saturn, kind of the launch games and stuff. You have companies like Genki that are doing these very slow-paced first-person dungeon crawlers from there's still kind of a first-person shooter in the sense because you're from the perspective of a combat mech or whatever, kind of stomping your way through these corridors and these dark, quiet, somber environments. Whereas at the same time, over here, we're doing Doom, which is not polygonal 3D, but it is blazing vast and super action forward and very arcadey and very, very intense. And so, like, there's a lot of ink has been spilled over the years about the ways in which 3D camera adoption in general kind of had a weird rocky start in like across all of Asia, not just Japan. So this feels very extra unique in that sense, I think, as a game that is a pretty fast-paced, action-forward video game. It's, again, very arcadey, and I know that that was part of the reason that the PS2 kind of reimagining Maken X shifted to 3D.
And we should note maybe too that like this game did get a sort of remake like for the PS2 where instead of being first person, it was now third person, and they changed up the systems a little bit.
Yeah, they added a bunch of different kind of ideas in there that made it a relatively different game. It's not just a straight up port. It is a different enough thing that it is has its own identity. But I think that is kind of shifting away from the primary thing that is like the most immediately jarring aspect of Maken X is just that it's a first-person melee combat game.
Mm-hmm.
And there are not a lot of those, especially not back this far, that aren't like, something made in Germany for the personal computer.
Yeah.
This is one of those many games where you play as someone who has the arms of a bear shooting knives out of your tongue. Just one of those.
Granted, yeah, it's banjo, many such cases.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hey everyone, my name's Darren Hupke. I'm a writer, publisher, and podcaster. My podcast is called Pixels and Polygons. Each week I sit down with a guest and ask one simple video game question. It's a random topic each week and it leads to a fun conversation. You can find it on your favorite podcast platform every Friday, and you can read more about it at pixelsandpolygons.net.
Listen to Flashback 64, the chronological Nintendo 64 podcast. Hosts Gooey, McKenna, and friends flashback to the 90s and early 2000s with a look at the Nintendo 64's catalog and its contemporary cultural and historical context. Starting with the console's launch titles and proceeding in release order, we discuss classics like GoldenEye, Super Mario 64, and Star Fox 64, as well as some not-so-beloved games, lesser-known titles, and everything in between. Along with game-specific deep dives, we also cover other bits of pop culture from the time, like films, music, and more. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
One thing I'd like to do with this show is, rather than trying to fit an entire game into an episode, I know with some podcasts, it's like, this is the whatever game episode. And then you move on to the next one and you're going in like an order, going in a sequence, you're doing like one game per show. I'd rather focus on central concepts or central questions about certain games, because there's just so much to talk about with these games. We might come back to Maken X sometimes. There might be other things we want to talk about with it. Rather than trying to say this is the Maken X episode, we'll identify just some main questions or things we want to break down about the game. So one thing that stood out to me was thinking about weighing the gameplay against the art direction. So I think that's one direction we could go with this conversation, is thinking about like how we balance those things. Like, is the aesthetic experience enough if there are certain things from the gameplay that are sometimes making a game not as much like raw, tangible fun in the way that video games sometimes are? Or would we maybe place art direction and some of those other aesthetic parts of playing a game more secondary and prefer a game just be always fun? Like, does a video game always have to be fun? Is it enough for a game to just be interesting sometimes? That's a question that comes up for me when I'm playing this game. And then Fredo, did you have, I know the concept of Sega bringing more games to the West was a topic that came up for you with this game, but were there any other guiding questions you would like to make sure we cover with this conversation?
Yeah, I mean that certainly was one of them. I think that there's an interesting related conversation that we could have around. I guess I would call it the Sublime 7. I think I mentioned that to you in one of the messages of these games that have like obvious flaws but are so interesting and do certain things really well, and how you sort of compare. It's a thing I talk about all the time on Fredo's stream when I'm playing something. I think Blades of Fire is probably the most recent example of this, of a game that gets kind of middling reviews, but it gets middling reviews because it does certain things like amazingly well and like really interestingly, but then has major obvious annoying flaws, versus a game that's just kind of middle of the road at everything. And I definitely have, as much as I can get frustrated by those types of games, I definitely have a soft spot for a lot of those games that are like really interesting proof of concept and interesting ideas and some really cool stuff, but it's just not quite baked all the way, or because they're so bold and experimental, they just haven't quite nailed the feel of things. I always find that very interesting, and they're not always my favorite games, but I sure am glad that we have games like that, because I think that they push the medium forward more than the sort of safer, quote, safer options.
Yeah, I wish I had the origin of this post in front of me so that I could properly credit it. I apologize, but it was going around again the other day of just like, to paraphrase it, it was like, you will never fall completely in love with a perfect work. It's impossible. You will only fall head over heels in love with something that is kind of janky and messed up and like could be much better in some very obvious ways, but isn't, and just like has some weird glaring flaws, but is also making those big swings. And yeah, I think that's there is a lot of inherent charm in stuff that doesn't work quite right.
Yeah, so I think that's something we can definitely explore as well. I think it dovetails well with the question I brought too about like weighing gameplay and aesthetics and like, does it have to be perfect to still be good? Andrew, were there any other central questions you wanted to make sure we got to with this conversation?
Yeah, just kind of more generally, I wanted to talk about some of the presentational aspects. We touched on this a little bit earlier with the kind of Shin Megami Tensei affiliations that the game does and does not have, but because of the very kind of overt creative hand and presence of people like Kaneko and Meguro, it's that kind of authorial push is still very much in there. And I am I'm not sure how to unpack that necessarily, but I think it's worth getting into. But also on top of that, there's just like there's technical presentation stuff that I'm curious about. They brag about the game's like performance and poly count and stuff on the back of the jewel case, and there's a whole section in the manual about like where you need to be setting your speakers in your living room and stuff. They're very specific.
I do remember finding it quite like technically impressive and artistically impressive at the time. I mean, and artistically, it still certainly holds up. Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird to think about that with like Atlas games. I mean, oftentimes they have very inspired art direction, but they're not necessarily usually right. They're not necessarily the most like technically advanced games. So this is an interesting period where they were kind of dipping their toe in that space and trying to do like a real cutting edge, like look at how many polygons we're pushing, sort of thing. Kind of atypical for them.
Yeah, I know they were excited about the Dreamcast, I think, when they saw everything it could do, and they're like, oh, we want to really push this to the limit. And like the project was like, they had to expand the budget and bring in more people as it went along. And I think it had a longer development cycle than they were initially expecting, because I think they just got really ambitious with it. And maybe not everything worked, but I think most of it did. And it is still like a really good looking video game. I think that's one of my favorite things about this era of games is that I feel like so many of these games really hold up visually. Not that, and like I find the chunky polygons of the Nintendo 64 still very charming and stuff too. I don't mind that. Older pixel art obviously is great, but there is something about there's sort of a crossing of a Rubicon here where we start to get things that are a little bit more realistic and a little bit more polished looking that hold up very well under just a modern lens.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a conversation I've recently had online, and I wish I could remember the folks I was talking to credit them. But there's a certain I know a lot of people these days talk about like a lot of these big games chasing like super fidelity and sacrificing a lot of things to try to hit that incredible lifelike fidelity, and it does feel. At least to me, I'm curious how the two of you feel about it, that there's kind of a sweet spot in fidelity. And I feel like it's the sort of from the Dreamcast to about the PS3, that window of consoles where like they started to get more realistic, but it wasn't quite technically advanced enough to really try to do real life type graphics for the most part. So the games had like a little more style and a little more character, and they weren't just all trying to look like photorealistic, which I mean, look, certainly there's a lot of creative and interesting games coming out, especially in the indie space, but it wasn't really very plausible to chase photorealism in this era. So there was a little bit more, I don't know, artistic creativity via necessity and a little bit more character as a result of that. So I similarly very much have a soft spot, like aesthetically, for a lot of stuff in exactly this window from, the 99-ish to the mid 2000s or so is, a lot of really like the look of a lot of stuff from that window.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're very much in an era now where UE4 and UE5 make it very economically responsible, I guess, to make games that kind of lean in that direction. Like if we talk about like Claire Obscure's aesthetic being just Unreal Engine .jpeg or whatever, there are things about the way that engine constructs an image, right? Or the ways that it handles light bouncing off of like the physically based rendering, the PBR nature of like textures and surfaces and stuff, and the way that it has all of the, I'll cut myself off before I get too nerdy about this, but like,
feel free to get nerdy about
it. Of like just shortcuts is not the right word, but like there are templates, I guess, that make sense to follow, because a lot of the work that would be really, really labor intensive on the programming side is handled for you up front. It lets you not necessarily like jump the line, but like it gives you a much a dependably stable foundation to build on, I guess, is probably how I would put it. But yeah, this is what we're going back to an era where people need to be very, very conscious of the way that the hardware renders a scene and constructs an image. The ways in which like the Saturn needs to do extra math to bend the vertices of flat 2D textures in 3D space on a z-axis to fake polygons. Like it's just we're still, when we're talking about the Dreamcast and Xbox, GameCube, PS2 era, like really the 360 and PS3 is kind of where that stops and kind of cuts off. Like that's kind of the last time that we had consoles where the graphics, as an umbrella term, for both tech art and art direction and art style and aesthetic implementation of that art style is very much dependent on the hardware. Because after that, Xbox One, PS4, and everything, it's x86 architecture. They're computers, they're PCs.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes. So that's not necessarily a thing anymore, but like the further back you go, the more obvious it gets, right? Like you put an N64 and a PS1 port of the same game next to each other, and you're probably not going to have difficulty telling which one is which, right? And I think there are a lot of interesting little things that they're doing with the Dreamcast hardware in Maken X as well, in terms of just like they're leaning into like the VGA output, so it has this like really crisp, clean 480p progressive scan. If you want to plug this into a like a VGA CRT, which is what I was doing earlier today, it's gorgeous. It's very, very clean. Like I said, it does keep a locked 60 FPS almost all the time. There are moments where, like if you stack enough transparencies on the screen from either like enemies, breathing fire at you, or enough of their like bodies fading away at once, the math will make the system slow down. It will cut down to, I believe it's doing a double buffer VSync, so I believe it cuts from 60 down to 30, but it also cuts the game speed in half, not just the amount of frames that you're seeing. So the game then moves in slow motion. But I mean, those are few and far between. Generally speaking, the game is extremely smooth and steady, and everything feels rock solid. There's also a lot of, they make very good use of just like solid color, flat shaded polygons in this game, because like Kaneko's art style is so flat shaded in his kind of like manga-esque approach to everything, that when that's what are words? Translated, there we go, into a 3D environment, that usually works out very well, and they don't need a lot of detail on the models for it to work. So after this, Atlas did Shin Megami Tensei 9 on the Xbox, which was intended to be an MMO, but Xbox Live was not up yet, so it's like a weird single-player MMO. It never came out here. It's very strange. It's really cool, but it's very strange. But they ended up taking the character models that they made for all of the demons and stuff in that game and just stuck them right into Nocturne on the PS2, and kind of just were able to reuse them a whole bunch moving forward. And I think Maken X is a very good example of making use of, again, the limitations of the hardware. The Dreamcast is similarly to the N64, though not nearly as bad. It has a very limited cap on texture memory, which is why a lot of surfaces, a lot of Dreamcast games look weirdly kind of blurry, despite the rest of the game looking kind of like higher res. That's kind of just a weird hallmark of the Dreamcast look, so to speak. But it's, it's not nearly as bad. The N64 is, I believe, 4 kilobytes of texture memory, which is nothing.
Yeah, outrageously tiny. I talked about this on the flashback, but I think you bring up a very good point here, and especially about how the art style of Maken X and I mean a lot of that Atlas stuff is so perfectly suited to the both the strengths and limitations of the Dreamcast. I mean, it really it's like a perfect synergy in a lot of ways.
Yeah. For sure. I just think it lends itself really well to what they were doing.
Yeah. And then Fredo, did you want to talk more about your concept of the Sublime Sevens?
Yeah, hey, as much as I would love to take credit for that, I definitely did not invent that term, but I forget who did. But for sure, I think this game is such a good example of exactly that, where, and I'd be curious to hear just opinions from the two of you of how you typically feel about this kind of game. I mean, I certainly, there is a lot to be said for rigor and quality and having a game work well and all of that. So I don't want every game to be like this. And I'll again go to my Blades of Fire example, which I like enjoyed and found very interesting. But if every game was like that, I'd be like tearing my hair out. So a lot of times I play one of these and then I'm like, all right, maybe I want to play something that's a little more, maybe a little less creative and interesting, but feels and works a little better. And then maybe I want to play like another charmingly janky, weird creative game. So definitely have a soft spot for these types of games. Definitely like them a lot. I think they're some of the most interesting games to think about and talk about. I mean, I think many aspects of Maken X are remarkably forward thinking, as evidenced by the fact that many of the games that are comparable to it that we're discussing are games that came years later. Just to say nothing about how it influenced, decisions to bring stuff over and the Shin Megami Tensei, because I think it was the first game in 3D with that art style too, which of course became a prolific thing, and many other games after that. So a lot of times it's exactly that kind of game that gets people thinking, and even if it's not the best, ends up having, I guess we could call it a lot of influence for the reception that it got, right? You wouldn't necessarily think that a game like Maken X, which when I was doing research before this show, I saw only sold like 50,000 copies in the West, which was lower than far lower than I expected. But
I read 66,000 in Japan and 40,000 here.
And 66
like 40,000 in North America.
40,000. Okay, interesting.
Was
right. Oh, yeah, because there could have been. I'm not sure if it came out in Europe, but maybe if the 50 figure I saw included Europe or something.
Oh, it could be.
I think it came out in Europe too.
Okay, yeah, so maybe they sold 10 in Europe and 40,000 in the US or something like that. But yeah, I mean, stuff like this, stuff like I'm just thinking about, I'm looking at my shelf right now and I haven't checked it out yet, but Bloodlines 2, which recently came out, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines being a very famous example of one of those very janky, almost broken. I mean, I would say it is
popsicle
broken.
sticks and a wish.
Yeah.
And I say that,
but so
endearingly.
interesting, so forward thinking, so bold and experimental. I love this kind of stuff. And thinking back, I mean, there were certainly some things like that I really enjoyed on earlier consoles. Stuff like, I don't know, Evo: The Search for Eden on Super Nintendo, or of course Mr. Domino on the PlayStation 1, and all-time Fredo favorite. No one can stop Mr. Domino.
Can't do it. Many have tried.
Yeah, many have tried. Deception, that's another series that I love. That's like so weird and out there and barely works a lot of the time, but so cool, so interesting. I love that kind of stuff.
First one, though.
Yeah. And I think it's worth saying too that the game's like reviews at the time were actually pretty good.
Yeah, I remember they were
the Japanese.
What was 7s and 8s, kind of that kind of range from what I recall.
It got a variance, right? And I think that actually is usually a good sign if a game has like a wide variance. So the Japanese Dreamcast magazine gave Maken X scores of 9, 9, and 7 out of 10 from 3 critics. So like 2 9s out of 10 is like those are good reviews, right?
Usually
32 from Famitsu, right?
Sorry?
So 32 from Famitsu, I think.
Yeah,
right?
32 from
Famitsu. Pretty solid.
IGN gave it a 7.9. But then you have like Game Revolution giving it a C+. Electronic Gaming Monthly, a 5.83 out of 10. If we sort of average it out.
Yeah.
So it's like 5s to like 9s.
But that usually is right. Like if I'm, that's a perfect example of the Sublime 7, because a game that gets 7s across the board versus a game that like averages a 7, but some people gives it 5 and some people give it 9s. Like the games in that latter category, in my experience at least, are often like a lot more interesting, a lot more charming, and a lot more memorable. Maken X again being a great example of that.
Yeah, like a game that like has an average of a 7 and a game that only gets 7s, those are not the same thing.
No, correct. I don't think so.
And it's not bad to get all 7s either necessarily. Like
it's a different kind of thing.
That's fine. It's a different kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So should we talk about maybe why it got that range of scores?
I think a lot of it has to do with, and yeah, this is an interesting discussion topic because it boils down to, I think, how much the individual reviewing it values the things it did well versus the things it didn't do so well. I mean, Sean, earlier in this conversation, you'd alluded to like, the art style and being like, interesting and cool versus being, mechanically sound. I think if you're a person that appreciates boldness and creativity and the art style and all of that, and maybe you have a little bit of tolerance for like the game being a little mechanically janky and a little wonky here and there,
It's got a
you'd
learning
probably
curve,
like
yeah.
this one a lot. Whereas if you're the kind of person that's like, maybe you don't care as much about that stuff and you want the game to like just work really well, which was a lot more common in this era because you had a lot more stuff that was unplayably buggy, and well, not to say that
Yeah.
doesn't still happen, but that kind of like mechanical soundness is a thing you value. I feel like it got a lot more priority in that era versus this era. So I don't think it's wrong, right? I think it's very sensible that somebody might play this and give it a 6 or whatever, because it's like, yeah, it's like wonky. It's got like a lot of like technical issues and stuff, and they maybe don't put as much weight on the art style and the creativity and those elements. So to me, thinking back to the reception it got, I think that's a large part of the variance, and it boils down to like the individual reviewers' preference and value for those things, and we all have our own. Biases is maybe too mean a word, right? We all have our things that we maybe value a little bit more or less than the average person, and it's these weird quirky ones that make those differences come out the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like to even say it's janky, I think janky can mean so many different things. Like I don't think that's wrong. Like I think that could be a good word for it. But it's like janky in like its idiosyncrasies, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
like you're clipping through a wall and like the game feels like very polished in a lot of ways, right? It doesn't feel like it's like falling apart around
Yeah.
you. But then it'll have things like jumping over the enemy where your character doesn't normally jump that high. They just for some
Right.
reason can jump that high when they are locked
Yeah.
onto an enemy standing a certain distance
only when
from
doing the
them.
one specific move, or the point Andrew brought up earlier when like you have bodies fading and the transparencies are stacking up and the game like slows down, and
Yeah.
it's not a huge thing, but again, especially 1999, you think about stuff like people were really thinking a lot about performance, and we had like multiplayer shit, Quake 3 blowing up, and that kind of like smooth experience was very meaningful to a lot of people because we were just getting to the point of that being like a thing we were seeing a lot in big mainstream games. So I can get why somebody would see that and be like, "Oh, this sucks. Look at the way everything slows down when these bodies fade. This is so annoying." Right? I get it, but for me, certainly worth dealing with that stuff for the things that this game does well, especially in light of kind of how that style of game developed in the decades since.
Mhm. Yeah, like
It's also just
with the
weird.
jumping over things, it's like I felt like even though I got the move down pretty well, I always felt like there was this like 10% chance that it wasn't going to work for some reason, and
Yep.
I would just end up
Mm-hmm.
leaping into the enemy, right? Like
Yep.
so it was
I
like a
remember.
little
Yeah.
touchy, and when it worked, it felt good, and most of the time it worked. But then sometimes you would just jump into the enemy and be like, "Well, why didn't it work that time? I thought I did everything the way that I normally do."
Yeah, or you hit them right when the animation finishes as they're entering the like vulnerable state or whatever, but it turns out there's still another however many frames after the animation finishes before the iframes end. So it's like you're using the information that you have as a player to do what you think you're supposed to do, but it's like you hit them and bounce off, and it's like if you had hit them like a half second later, it would have been fine, kind of thing. Just a lot of weird
Yeah.
little rough edges like that.
Great
But it's also
example
just
of
like a
yep.
thing that I think I could see a lot of reviewers at the time bouncing off of anyway, just because of like Sega's localization of this is very strange. Like they use the Sonic Adventure voice cast, which is also the Blue Stinger voice cast. Like it's they had a crew of people that they were using for stuff like this.
Speaking of Sublime Sevens, shout out to
Exactly,
Blue
yeah.
Stinger.
Yeah, good old Blues Tinger. What a game. Yeah, speaking of games that have wildly different cameras
Yeah.
in their Japanese releases. But yeah, it's just it's a little silly and weird, and it's if you're not down with that kind of awkwardness, it could be very, very easy to make fun of, I think. And the fact that there's just not a lot else to compare this directly to, because there's not a lot else doing what this game is trying to do. So like I saw a lot of English language reviews out there from for whatever reason this seemed especially common in some of the European outlets at the time, but like people were mad that it didn't have split screen multiplayer with guns, and kept name dropping GoldenEye. And I have so many questions.
That sort of stuff. Oh man, I don't want to get started here because that sort of stuff is so fascinating to me. When you see the comparisons that people make and the influence of things that they're playing at around the same time. When I see that sort of stuff, a lot of UK publications, especially during this era, and even many years later, would often make bizarre comparisons to GoldenEye in places where it feels like it's like the one game to come out of there that a lot of people really like. Full disclosure, I'm a little bit of a GoldenEye is overrated guy, but I mean, I think it's a good game. But it's always so fascinating to see that, and I was thinking about it from a similar perspective, because one of those things that I think about a lot is like, if you're playing a type of game and you've recently played, or you're simultaneously playing something that's like mechanically similar or has the same perspective, that might have some influence, right? So I'm picturing, let's imagine somebody in this era that's like coming off of reviewing Quake 3 or something, and how like fast paced that is.
Like Soul Calibur.
Soul Calibur, right? Or if you're working for a Dreamcast magazine, this would have been. I'm trying to think of what would have been, because this wasn't quite launch in the US.
No. 7 months later.
Yeah, 7 months later. But, you might have been coming off playing something that's smoother in terms of some of those little quirks we were talking about, and it makes those issues like a little bit more salient. They jump out at you a little more, versus if somebody was playing this, I don't know, coming off of playing one of those clunky first-person dungeon crawler games, they'd be like, wow, this is like lightning fast, right? It really...
incredible.
Yeah, it really can influence the way you think about something, and especially when it's such a quirky thing that only vaguely compares to other, first-person games.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about like the old classic EGM line of the end of their Doom review. That's just like, what if you could talk to the monster?
Oh, that's from Edge, Edge, not EGM.
Edge. Sorry, yes, that's
my all-time favorite.
That was a bad mix-up on my part.
Yeah, I've posted about that many times. I find that hilariously. That's the same review that said, once you get tired of the graphics in Quake or in Doom, there like won't be much reason to come back. Like, you'll get tired of Doom in a couple of weeks, which is like maybe the most objectively incorrect any take anyone has ever had about a video game. It's extremely funny.
Like, you can see where their head's at, though, like in a way, like you can see where they're trying to get more like sort of heady and academic about the way that we talk about games, but it's also like it's still very like stunted and early in that maturation process.
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely get where you're coming from on that. But oh boy,
not to diminish its being very silly. Like, it is still extreme. Like, even in the context of its day, it's still very, very silly. But yeah, like in terms of like first person, the reason I'm thinking of Soul Calibur is like I'm thinking of like the other weird connections that people would be making at the time of like on the platform, another polished game where you're swinging swords at people.
Yeah, right. I mean,
because like if you go
melee combat, right, with a sword.
Yeah, and like there is at least a little bit of precedent. Like Bushido Blade has a first person mode that you can play not split screen, but you could link two PlayStations together and two TVs and play first person Bushido Blade against each other that way if you really want to. That is a thing that you can do. And then there are a couple of the like early 3D midway fighting games like BioFreaks and stuff that have a first person mode. Like there are times when people have stuck the camera onto the face of the like action game character that they've made and just been like, here's a thing you can mess around with. We did it. I don't know.
Yeah, it was like a fun novelty
main way you interact with the game. Exactly. Totally. Yeah. It might as well be a cheat code. You know, there's just not. So the idea of like building an entire game around that and also having this whole brain jacking thing where you're not just building a first-person melee action combat game for one character with a handful of different like weapons and abilities or whatever. You're throwing a whole bunch of different characters in there with different stats and different movesets and completely different like rhythms of play. And like I imagine that trying to balance all of those plates has got to be damn near impossible, especially back then with the time and resource budgets that they'd be working with.
Yeah,
So, like, the fact that it plays as well as it does is kind of a miracle.
It would be, I mean, if you're thinking about making something like this as a multiplayer game, especially, it would have to be like a completely different thing. You're talking about like a For Honor like at this point, right? Like it's not
totally,
even,
yeah.
you know,
You're making a different video game.
Absolutely. And I can similar to the point you brought up earlier, Andrew, that like I can see where they're coming from because it was a thing that a lot of games had, and there was like an expectation because people
selling points.
Yes, and people would just reflexively be like, well, it doesn't have multiplayer, so that's like a minus point, which I think is what led to, in the subsequent era, a lot of games having like not so great tacked on multiplayer, because a lot of reviewers would just be like, well, no multiplayer, so it gets like -1 point, and that led to some very interesting decisions in game design.
Or in the online era, publishers see it as a retention thing.
Yep.
You know, like famously there was the the 2K making 2K Marin throw a bunch of multiplayer stuff into BioShock 2 because they were trying to minimize it being resold to GameStop, where then people would be then buying a pre-owned copy for a lower price as opposed to buying a new one.
Yeah.
Because like at that point, it's like impacting sales in a very direct and strange way, just because you have this like entrenched and formalized secondhand retail market that's sort of unique to video games in a way, and it ends up kind of changing the way that we design and build the games themselves. But that's a whole other broader conversation. But it's just, the way that these things are received is very strange. Like I said a moment ago, I went back and read my buddy James' review for GameSpot, and he was just predictably, because he's James, is ranting about Kaneko and Meguro and like all the people involved in this thing that are leading the aesthetic direction and the kind of creative vision of the whole thing, and are trying to just put this weird idea of a thing that they had and made out into the world. And I think that's probably the right mindset to be approaching this with, and I think that's probably a more common mindset these days, as opposed to looking at it as a product review from the angle of purchasing advice, which is what a lot of Games Crit was for a very, very long time.
Oh, for sure.
They're like, we've heard you want multiplayer, we've heard you want GoldenEye, so we're going to come up with a new version of Maken X where you can brainjack James Bond. We'll just throw him out there. He's got his PPK. The game gets way easier now that you have a gun.
Related to SMT, I'm thinking about the Dante cameo in SMT3 that they would have done like a Maken X, like featuring James Bond, even Ian Fleming novels, and the little sticker on the box.
I like thinking of like talking to the monsters too. One, I feel like this is a game where I would be interested in hearing what the monsters have to say, because the enemy designs are just so interesting. I wasn't really familiar with Kaneko's art, but then like once I like looked up who he was and saw other games that he'd done, it's like, oh, I've definitely seen this art before.
Yeah,
and I felt like that was part of the joy of playing this game. Is like there's not necessarily a lot that you're like unlocking as you play. Like you're getting new levels and finding new characters and stuff, but just seeing a new enemy design felt like something I was like anticipating by playing it. It's like, what new creative creature are they going to have me fight next? Or what really new creative like blade master am I going to meet next? I want to unlock a new one and meet them and see who they are. And that's part of the reason why I do want to go back and play through it again, because as you go through the game, you aren't going to hit every level. I don't maybe there's some way you could make choices so that you hit every single level, but as you go through the game making choices, you're not going to see everything, you're not going to meet everyone. And
it's a kind of branching path, Star Foxy, Castlevania 3E kind of thing.
Yeah, and so like looking back, it's like there are certain places that opened up that like closed off as I was going along, and I didn't know quite how the game was going to work as I was first going through it. And looking back, I feel like I should have had more than one save file, and maybe I should have like played with different files so I could go back and like make choices differently to see what happened. And once I finish beating it this first time, I do want to go back and play through again and make different choices to just meet new characters and see different things I didn't see the first time. And I don't always feel that interested in playing through a game again just to get a different ending. But I think like knowing that there's different stuff to see along the way is going to pull me back in and want like I might just kind of pick right up where I left off and be like, okay, let's start this over again and let's make some different choices this next time. A few other things though that I think are the things that make the game a little taxing sometime is I wish it had checkpoints. I think dying and having to start a level all over again is brutal in some cases.
Yeah, and that's one of those
got
things
pretty
that
good at running past enemies at some point.
yeah, it's one of those things that does make it feel there certain aspects of playing older games where it jumps out at you that this is a relic of its time, and that idea of like no checkpoints, you got to redo the whole level if you die. That's very of its time.
Talk about this game being an arcadey action game. That is what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
And like I got used to it as it went along, and it is satisfying that like you play through a level, you get a little further, you die, start all over again, play through it, get a little bit further, die, start all over, and get better at the level. Eventually you beat it, and it feels good to finally beat it. But it does feel like maybe that could have felt less like work along the way. Like, there's a certain point where it's like, okay, this is starting. Now I'm on my like third or fourth run of this level. It's starting to feel a little bit more like work than fun. I'm still into it, still enjoying it, but it's like, I kind of wish I had a checkpoint, especially if there's like, like a level that has a boss at the end. Die at the boss, start over, play through the level again. And they're not really long levels, but they're like just long enough that you don't really want to play them over from the beginning if you died at the very end.
It definitely I think even in this era, it was starting to feel like a little bit of an old school design sensibility. I mean, it reminds you of the way like Mega Man and stuff like that work, where you kind of keep doing the level till you master it, and
Although I think Mega Man has checkpoints, doesn't it?
It does for lot because you have lives, right? Because here you only have one life.
That's true. I mean, Mega Man does have a lot of checkpoints as well. Anytime you enter a room that's empty, without any enemies or whatever, that's a checkpoint room. At least in the first 6.
Yeah, so just some of that, like the way it's designed, some of the UI things, like I kind of like how like if you brainjack someone new, you leave behind the other guy in that level, and then you have to kind of like go back to them on the map to like find where you left them,
like where you parked your car.
It is like that, yeah. Because sometimes you are wandering around the earth, like, and you don't have to play through the whole level and find them again, and they at least like mark on the map where someone has been left. But it feels like sometimes you're like, oh, I want to be that guy again. Where'd I leave him? And you're going around from level to level. You're like, oh no, I left Devin here, but I'm looking for so-and-so or something. And then there's like certain areas that are closed off, and you'll get to a terminal and it just says like you don't have the right character to open up that level, but it doesn't tell you who you need. And I guess I sort of appreciate that it doesn't like spoil that, but it also means that like I would just like cycle through the characters that I did have to be like, can he open up this level? Okay, no, he can't. Okay, I guess I'll leave.
That just explicitly tells you like, hi, I can unlock electronic locks. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I know where to take you now.
Mm-hmm. Although he can't unlock every electronic lock.
No, no, just the last one that you saw, basically.
Yeah, because at first when I got him, I'm like, okay, he can unlock the things I couldn't do before. No, a lot of them you can't.
These are little, I mean, great examples, little QOL things that I feel like, if it had maybe been a little later, or because I feel like these days when you run into those types of mechanics in a game, they have something, right? Like the screen on the computer will change color if you can interact with it, or whatever, something like that to make it a little bit more obvious, and you don't have that kind of frustrating trial and error. But I'm trying to be, I recognize that wasn't so common in games of this era, but I definitely agree with you that could get a little bit annoying.
Yeah. The voice acting is amusing, I thought too, like in just how it varies. I thought Kay's voice acting I was fine with. I think the fact that she's sort of in this other dimension, like some of her line delivery feels a little distant, but it almost felt like she's kind of in this sort of dreamy other space, and like that worked for me. But sometimes you do get through this darker kind of horror themed level, and then you get to this kind of creepy menacing boss at the end, and it's like, oh, what's this guy going to be like? And then they're like, oh, I can see you found me, and they like have this like silly voice, and I'm like, are they supposed to be comical, or is this supposed to be serious? Like, I can't read what the tone of this is supposed to be. And I didn't really mind that they had kind of silly voices sometimes, but it was jarring, right? It did take me out of it for a second.
Yeah, a bit of a like old anime dub feeling to it, and being somebody
Pretty much,
that
yeah.
was also a fan of anime at the time, and English dubs weren't always the best. A lot of times, these localized Japanese games would remind me of those kind of second tier dubs with maybe inappropriate emotions or not the best most well thought out depictions of a character because they were probably done pretty quickly, pretty cheaply, using talent they had
Without a lot
available.
of
Like you
context,
pointed out earlier,
usually,
right? The
yeah.
Sonic Adventure people, because that was who they had access
They
to.
had, yeah.
Certainly lends a certain type of charm to the game in a way too, though.
It is very charming. Yeah, like I didn't really mind once I just got used to the fact that that's what the game was going to be like. It just also felt like, is this what they're going for, or is this just how it turned out?
Yeah, it's like Ken Ibrahim became the voice of Sega Rally just by virtue of being the singular American guy in the building. Like that
That's
was
great.
it. They're just like, you can deliver these lines, just like an American would because you are. Here you go.
Wait, so is that the guy that's like very long, easy right, and like all that
Yep.
stuff? Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah, straight up, he was just a guy that worked there.
that's hilarious.
Yeah, so like just some of the actual act of playing the game, right? Sometimes it feels like it's working against you a little bit. Sometimes you feel like you're kind of hitting your head against the wall a little to figure out how to get
For
past
sure.
a certain part.
Get to the end of the level and be like, oh, I brought the wrong tool for this job.
Yep.
This is the wrong character
Gonna
here
have
for this
to
boss
die
fight.
and redo the whole stage, but this time go to the
Yep.
boss as this other character. Yep,
Mhm.
annoying.
Yep.
And yet I did feel like I always wanted to see what was going to happen next. And I feel like that's the hallmark of a good story. If I like give writing advice or something, like I tell people, it's like you want the audience always thinking about like, well, what's going to happen next? Well, now what's going to happen next? Well, now what's going to happen next? And I love when I'm playing something or watching something or reading something where I feel like I genuinely don't know what's coming. Like anything could happen next. And this is a game that invites that and makes you
Yeah.
feel curious and makes you really want to, like, even if the story is dense and confusing and very abstract,
Kind of background
I
is.
still wanted to know who I was going to meet next. And I
Yeah,
wanted to
it's-
know where I was going to go next and what new cool thing was going to happen. Like, who is going to shoot a blade out of their tongue, or who is going to, shoot some kind of like energy beam out of the big mouth on their chest or something like that. Like, just so many interesting folks to meet along the way. And I wanted to meet the next new interesting character.
A lot of weirdos to collect,
Mhm.
for sure. But yeah, it's like, I know this is just kind of the case with like all media now, but like all of the weird stuff that you're talking earlier about it feeling prescient, like we're dealing with like a lot of the stuff that's happening in the background of this game, like geopolitically, is kind of like weirdly dense. There's escalating trade wars between China and the United States. There's a lot of stuff that is explicitly about a rising fascism in the United States. There is the entire thing with like disrupting trade because of a plague that sweeps across Europe that's just totally unchecked. There's stuff in there about oil wars. Like it's very it's a lot of just like, yep, we're still here. But like some of what you're describing happens a lot in the level design as well, because like you're doing a lot of globe trotting, and a lot of the levels are kind of cartoonish in some degrees as you work towards like Saudi Arabia and stuff. It feels like pretty cartoon racist approximations of just these regions of the world. But sometimes they do pull some weird like environmental stuff on you that kind of help draw very obvious lines for like where they're putting the the blade masters and the hake, the agents of Geist and such, to the point that like one of the earlier levels, depending on what route you're on, you'll find yourself walking around London, and then you turn a corner and there's this big Nazi ziggurat covered in swastikas and war eagles, and it's got a bunch of monsters swirling all over it, and it's a lot of the artwork was actually changed for the Western release during localization, because there was a lot more just explicit Nazi imagery in a lot of the character design, like the guys with the chain guns sticking out of their crotch, for example, that already kind of like read as kind of stormtroopers in that sense, but they just were straight up just wearing actual like Wehrmacht uniforms and stuff in the Japanese release, and they have the like World War I like spiked helmet thing going on. Like they are very not interested in subtlety in terms of what they're drawing from here, and a lot of that works its way into the environments the deeper into the game you go, because you're finding yourself kind of more woven directly into the main threads of the story, depending on again which route you're on and what you've decided Maken's kind of overall like ambitions and priorities are as a character, I guess. Because if you just look at a brief summary of the different endings in that game, like they're wildly different in terms of what you are doing and why, and what the effects are, and who is going to be on the receiving end of those effects, just like societally, let alone the direct characters that are involved. So like it's the further you go, the more they start doing weird stuff inside the actual levels. I think like there's a level in Washington D.C. that opens in the Oval Office, and then a big elevator comes out of the ground, and you walk inside, and then you drop down to a weird like underwater facility full of robots that have missile launchers in their gut. Like it's very goofy, but it's like it starts getting more like almost like a parody of Deus Ex the further you go in, I feel like, in terms of what they do with level design and the enemy design and stuff as you get further in the way that they mix those things in each level. The game starts getting more diverse in its focus, both aesthetically and thematically, I think.
Yeah, it is interesting when it comes to the United States to see what they did with that. I wouldn't want to spoil too much about that, but it is interesting how America gets brought into this too. And it does have these interesting, very broad depictions of these different places that are maybe kind of stereotypical in certain ways, but are still like, it's still neat that they're like, I can see that they're trying to be like, let's make this a globe-trotting adventure. And I do appreciate stories where someone's traveling around the world, going to different countries, and it's a neat concept.
This isn't like Punch Out on the Wii where we're dealing with like caricatures that are a problem, and this is not Tri-Isolon on the Dreamcast where we're dealing with caricatures that are a problem. But yeah, it's just kind of 90s cartoon ideas of what different parts of the world look like a little bit, to an extent. You know, like Paris is going to have accordions and striped shirts and berets, baguettes, and Eiffel Tower, all that kind of thing. It's very much that sort of depiction as generalization.
Yeah, so the vibe of a Japanese development team that many of whom probably had not been to any of those places, based on depictions they've seen in their media, because I mean this would have been pretty early internet too, right? So certainly you see that in a lot of media at the time. So yet another thing that I think makes this game interesting, though.
Yeah. Let's see. We are like 80 minutes into this, so I think it could be time to start wrapping up. There's just so much to talk about with this game, but I think we did address those central questions that we brought and explained what this game is about. There's obviously a lot more we could say, but I think despite maybe the flaws that were raised, I still think this game is so interesting. And like I said, I want to do another run through it and see the things I didn't see the first time. I'm curious about who those characters were that I didn't meet. I think that most of its ideas work, even if they're not always perfectly executed. And it also has me very curious to try out Maken X too on the PS2, which has a third-person perspective. I read that they did introduce checkpoints, which I'm excited about.
Oh.
And I think that like just seeing the characters is kind of neat, because it's like cool that you're behind their eyes and you see their weapons in front of you and stuff, and you do feel like you're another character. But they have such interesting designs. I think seeing them from a third-person perspective could be nice too. So I'm curious to try out that other one too, that I think did refine some aspects. I know for Japanese audiences, people were getting a little motion sick with this game as well. And I actually noticed that just a bit while I was playing too. If I was playing for a long time, I think especially in the levels that had enemies that were low to the ground, where I had to keep kind of like looking down and looking back up again. It's a fast moving game. And I noticed that sometimes it was just like, I felt almost, it was a little dizzying, I think, at times for me. Just a little bit if I played for a long time. So I think maybe like I can see why they were like, maybe we'll have a third person version of this too.
Yeah, the FOV is pretty tight, so you don't necessarily have a really broad view of your surroundings. So I could see how that could be really easy to get turned around.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, very cool game. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to make it one of the first ones we talked about on this new show. Any other final thoughts from either of you about this game before we sign off?
Yeah, I want to make my last nerdy audio note before we go out. They make a lot of hay about the sound in this game, and it seems like they were working a lot with object positional audio in the environment in a 3D sense, in terms of like just having sounds originate from the character or object that is making them, and trying. It seems like they were trying very, very hard to make that stuff communicate very clearly in stereo audio, because we're talking about that a lot, and there's a whole page about it in the manual that's like, it says this game employs a surround sound system, which is not true, and goes on about like it wanting you to make sure that your speakers are at angles of 10 to 15 degrees. It just, it's very like, it wants you to care about the sound in a game where the audio is compressed down to being very, very fuzzy, and I don't know. There's just something about that. Like, I'm not sure why they were pushing that so hard, because I'm not sure that it necessarily is doing really anything particularly unique there. Although it is worth mentioning, and another reason that I want to check out Maken X on PS2 is they did spring for the Dolby surround license on that, so that is a ProLogic game that does actually have surround sound support. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out. But that all aside, like I was talking about earlier, Maken X is just a very unique game for a lot of reasons, but it's also a very unique experience on the Dreamcast, and it's one of those weird things that just makes the Dreamcast what it is, and makes this era kind of feel like a fertile ground for weird creative experiments that were able to like actually have proper, full-on retail releases, in some cases being localized and sold by a first-party platform holder. Like it was just a very different time where you could do some really weird stuff and get it out there in front of the people that would be open to that weird stuff. So just as a big fan of Mega 10 and the work of the people involved in that series, and their artistic sensibilities and the kind of stuff that they make, this game does also resonate with me very much as well. And like Fredo said, there are a lot of huge quality of life problems with this thing, and it is a little frayed around a lot of its edges. But generally speaking, I have a lot of affection for Maken X.
Mm-hmm.
Atlas, make a sequel, cowards.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a. I mean, I agree with all of that. I mean, it's a shame. It's a tricky one to access, because I don't think that there's any like digital release on any storefront, right? You'd have to like either physically get a copy of the Dreamcast version to play it on your Dreamcast and hook that up if you don't have
Kids
it
at home,
up.
just emulate this.
Yeah, or
You don't
or
have to
emulate
be
it on the. I mean,
weird
that is
in
a nice
the
thing
ways
that
I
since it
am.
was on the Dreamcast, it's not right. They were like the 1 gig discs, so it's probably not too tricky to play it on PC and an emulator. But yeah, it does. Thinking back to like this era, especially, there's a lot of stuff that is not like easy to get to.
This is not a Windows CE game though, so it doesn't have the wrapper problems that a lot of Dreamcast games kind of used to in emulation. That's mostly a solved problem now, but it has been a speed bump in the past, but that is not an issue for Maken X.
So if this sounds interesting, folks, check it out that way. I hope that stuff like this encourages maybe a little more accessibility of Dreamcast stuff. Like, it would sure be great if Nintendo had a virtual console for the Dreamcast, or there was some better way to access those games on like a modern machine without having to mess around with unofficial emulation stuff on PC. But hey, there's not, so that's what you're going to have to do, folks.
Yeah. I think this is one where a picture is worth 1,000 words. Look up pictures of this game, look up video of this game, see what it looks like in motion, see how wonderfully wacky and bizarre it is, and you'll know if it looks like something that's up your alley or not. But I've been very pleased to learn about it and give it a shot, and I look forward to seeing what else it has to offer through the other paths I haven't gone down and what the very end of the game looks like too, because I'm right at the end, haven't beaten the last boss yet, but I think I'm like right at the end of the game, and I'm probably gonna start a new run relatively soon. Millennium Edition is an original podcast from the Soundstone Podcast Network. It is created and produced by me, Sean Douglas, and co-produced by Gooey Fame and Darren Hupke. Our show art is by Andrew Elmore, and our theme music is by Duncan Pixel T. Smith. We invite you to follow us online at the links in the show notes, and you can reach out to the show at soundstonenetwork@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll consider following us in your podcast player and leaving a positive review. Those reviews do go a long way in helping more people discover the show. For more great video game history podcasts, check out our other network shows, Pixels and Polygons, Flashback 64, Instruction Derby, and Kirby Conversations. We'll be back with another episode of Millennium Edition again soon, and thanks for listening.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. I'm Nick McConnell, and you caught me reading the instruction booklet for Street Fighter II in preparation for my weekly stream Instruction Derby, where I take a look at the creative, fun, and sometimes bizarre lost art of video game manuals. Did you know that, according to the manual for Street Fighter II on the Super Nintendo, Ryu was born in 1964, making him 62 years young, canonically? Happy birthday, Ryu. You're looking great. Did you also know that, per the manual for Laser Invasion on the Nintendo, the UN enters a conclave in order to select a new commando? Or did you know that the dancing enemies in Super Castlevania are named Paula Abgul and Fred Askare? These important facts and many more are discovered every Wednesday at noon Pacific on Instruction Derby over at internet website twitch.tv/Nick McConnell. Part of the Soundstone Network.